So let's get right to it. So today is the third lecture, and the title of this lecture is going to be Buddha Beyond Siddhartha, the Nature of a Buddha. So let's see if we could share the slides. Maybe I will be able to click here. Three. Are you sharing yet? Yeah, you have to share, otherwise. So, yeah, so I think this has been shared. Good. Okay. So the lecture tonight is going to be basically on kind of knowing, like, when we say Buddha, you know, who or what are we talking about, right? So Buddha beyond Siddhartha, but we'll always start with Siddhartha, so to say, because that's the reference point. So what is different about someone like the Buddha, different from, say, other founders of religion, is that as unique and special as he was, from very early on, the understanding is that, however, he's not the only one who is Buddha or awake. Yeah. So there are more that are similarly like him that have come in the past, that have existed in the past, and then there will be others that will come in the future, even as rare as such an occasion is. Yeah, so it's a little different from, say, the other founders of religion that we know about. One exception is in the tradition of the Jains, which is contemporaneous with the time of the Buddha. They too have this notion that there are these special beings, they call them the Tirthankaras or the jinas, that are unique, but not unique in the sense of never again, never before. As in, say, Christians and their belief about Jesus being the Christ. Never before and never again. Not the case in Buddhism. So we always start with Siddhartha because that's our reference point. So today too, we're going to look a little bit in depth about Siddhartha. What kind of a profile can we get from this if we look? So first, we're going to look at this seemingly simple statement, you know, I am a Buddha. So you remember I talked about last week, right? How somebody asked him, you know, like, what are you, right? Who are you? What are you? So he says, I'm Buddha. So we're going to look at that. Then we're going to look at the profile of a Buddha based on the earliest layer of Buddhist sources. And from there, you know, to be really academic about it, and academic in a good way, we can't say, you know, well, that was the Buddha, right? But what we can say is the earliest sources that we have that talks about the Buddha gives us this profile, this kind of a person. And so we're going to look at that. And then from there, we're going to look at further developments within the Buddhist tradition based on people reflecting on and people having experiences of their own, how this notion of Buddha begins to get more and more elaborated. So we're going to see that process as well. Yeah. So then for that, we're going to anchor that understanding on this notion of Buddhas having two types of bodies. Yeah? So body in the metaphoric sense, like a body of evidence, you know, so a collection, a body in that sense as well. So we're going to look at that. Yeah? Now, last time we met, I already mentioned this encounter, right, by an ascetic of a different tradition but nonetheless a holy person, an ascetic. He comes across the Buddha, and he could tell that there's something different about this person. And so then he says, what are you? And at first the Buddha did not say anything. So then this person goes down a list of things, a list of categories that he understood to be the range of possibilities. So in that range of possibilities, he starts off, he says, so are you, because he could tell this is not exactly a human the way that other humans are. So he starts off by saying, are you a god? So maybe the Buddha was very bright, shiny, which is what the word deva, the Indian word that we translate as God, deva means like bright or light beings, deva. So they say, are you a deva? And the Buddha said, no, I'm not. He said, oh, not a deva. So then he goes through a few other non-human possibilities. So are you a yaksha? A yaksha is a forest spirit of some sort. Are you a yaksha? And the Buddha says, no, I'm not. Then it's like, well, are you then, so a couple of other of these terms, what we might consider as non-human supernatural beings. And the Buddha denies, says, no, I'm not. So then this guy then like, well, so you mean you are human after all? Because at first I thought you were not because you look special. So are you human? Now, interestingly, the Buddha says, no, I'm not. So I think that one particularly is important. I guess between the deva and the human, these two saying no, I think is particularly relevant to us and our context. Because in the West, under that particular framework, right? Either you are human or you're divine. Yeah, especially when it comes to religion. The possibilities are you are human or you're divine. In fact, so much of the energy of the Christian tradition is spent on defining the nature of this person called Jesus. Yeah? God is simple enough, Holy Spirit is simple enough, but who was Jesus? Was he human? Was he divine? What was he? And so in ancient Christianity, there was a range of positions on whether he was human or divine. Right? Mainstream Christianity now says he's fully human and fully divine, two natures in one. Right? That's how they articulate the significance of why Jesus never before, never again. This is an instance where the human and the divine is fused together, but not like 2 cups of water poured together. Anyway, this is not a class on Christian theology, just to emphasize that so much of this debate is on, are you human or are you divine? Yeah, and so that tends to be our reference point. So often then when we read about how Buddhists say, oh, the Buddha wasn't a god, then we instantly think, oh, yeah, he was a human. That's what Buddhists believe. Oh, he was a human. And that's also what then a lot of secular readings of the Buddha, I don't have a problem with secular readings of who the Buddha was, except that these secular readings tend to be very religious. So these secular Buddhists are making religious claims. How do you know that he was human? Well, of course he was. Why? Well, what else would he be? He already says he's not divine. Like deeply committed to, he was human. But that's like taking one denial and ignoring the other denial, because in that same encounter, he said, no, I'm not human. Because human has certain implications, at least for the person who asked him. And also he wants to say, no, I'm not human. Instead, this is what he says. This is what he says. Just as a blue, red, or white lotus, born in water, grown up in water, having risen above the water, stands unstained by water. Even so do I, born in the world, grown up in the world, having overcome the world, dwell unstained by the world. Understand that I am Buddha. Yeah, so he is saying, yes, born in the world, raised in the world, but risen above the world. And so that's why also a lot of times you see Buddha images, the way they are represented now, as either standing on or sitting on like these big lotus cushions, right? These big seats with big lotuses, because that's the symbolism that's going on there. Just as lotuses not just grow in water, in fact, lotuses don't thrive that well in clean water. Lotuses and water lilies, they thrive in muddy water, what we might call yucky. But if you have seen how they grow, they blossom above the mud, unstained. Lotus leaves and the petals of the flowers have these waxy surface so that no dirt can land on it. But if you pluck it out of the mud, lotuses, if you pluck them when they are open, very quickly within the hour they close up. And then if they're not open and you pluck them out and you stick them in the water, they're never going to open. So in some ways, this symbolism that they are rooted in the world, but they're not stained by the world and what being human implies or involves. So by this definition, being human involves being stained by, and later in this course, we'll be looking more and more into that, being stained by what Buddhists called the mental defilements, the afflictions. Or one translation I've come across now is fermentation. Something is brewing, So free of that, he says, I am free of that and understand that, therefore I am Buddha. I am awake. And so there's two metaphors going on here, right? Mud and lotus, and then asleep and awake. Yeah? Literally, I am Buddha is I'm the awakened one. Yeah. You have the question? Do we have anything? No. Okay, I have to repeat the question. Make it short so that I can repeat the question because I can't. Yes. Is being a Buddha better than being a human? We're not saying that yet. We're just saying he's saying, no, I'm not human. Okay, so wait and see. You can decide whether it is or it is not. He's saying, I'm not human. I'm not divine. But of course, again, don't think that he was just denying those two. I'm highlighting those two because of our context. Yeah? Because of our context. Yeah? So then, because some people will say, well, I'm taking this course because I want to know about my situation, right? Actually, this course isn't designed to just do that. I also want you to understand the other. I also want you to understand, what people in the Buddhist time might be thinking. And people in the Buddhist time had a broader range than just divine and human. There's a whole bunch of other entities that populate that world. If nothing else, we should be able to see, the power of their imagination. If you're not willing to accept that, there are entities running around that we can't see, at least be able to appreciate that life where, there's a whole host of other beings occupying the space that we occupy. That was a given. Now, when we look at this further and say, okay, he says, I am Buddha, where else? What else can we take from these early sources to help us understand? What does that mean? Could you elaborate? Well, what better place than one of the oldest description of what happened on that night where it says, or actually it was dawn. It was right after he saw the morning star, it says. It was dawn of the full moon day of the 5th month, called Vaishakha. Hence, Buddhists celebrate this holiday called Vesak. It's usually in May. The full moon in May is how the international community now celebrates it, saying that, well, May, using that month, and then whatever full moon that is in May, that is the day. Yeah? So we celebrated that here this last year, and I assume we'll do it again. So on that morning, it is said, Siddhartha became Buddha, became awake, right? And again, one of the earlier sources tells us what was the content of that waking up, of that awakening. This is known now in Buddhist terms as gaining the 3 knowledges. So at this awakening, at this moment where Siddhartha became Buddha, not instantaneously, but through, it was a process he described. He said, at the first watch of the night. And so it started at the first watch of the night, the second watch of the night, and at the third watch, which is when the morning star was seen, that was when finally all 3 knowledges were gained. Yeah? So the first knowledge, recollecting past lives. So he could see, according to these early sources, he could see all his past lifetimes. And then how many were there? Nobody asked that question, But he himself made it quite clear that it was infinite, no end. No end to the past. He could see all of that, he says. He could see it all very clearly. So let me read to you what this early text said. So it says, there is one section that is repeated in all 3 of these knowledges, and I'll read that too, because I think it shows us how, what was the mechanics of this experience. Yeah, he says, when the mind was thus concentrated, so when his mind was concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, pliant, malleable, steady, and attained to the state of being immovable. Concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilements, pliant and malleable, and not rigid, pliant and malleable, steady and unmoving. At that point, he said, I directed this mind to the knowledge of recollecting my past lives. So this part, what I just read, is repeated for the second and the third. That you need your mind to be at that point and then directed at understanding. In this case, he said he could then see all his past lifetimes. I recollected many full past lives. 1 birth, 2, 5, 10, 50, 100, 1,000, 100,000, many eons of cosmic contraction, many eons of cosmic expansion, many eons of cosmic contraction, expansion. There I had such a name, belonged to such a clan, had such an appearance. Such was my food, such was my experience of pleasure and pain, such the end of my life. Passing away from that state, I re-arose somewhere else. There too, I had such a name, belonging to such a clan, ate such food, like this, did not like that. And he said, thus I remembered my manifold past lives in their modes and details. This was the first knowledge I attained in the first watch of the night. Then, this is also important, he says, ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose. So in this case, ignorance was destroyed in relation to his past lives. So you could say his own stuff. Yeah? His own stuff. He saw clearly. Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose. As happens in one who is heedful, ardent, and resolute. Those are also important qualities. Heedful, ardent, and resolute. But the pleasant feeling that arose in this way did not invade my mind or remain. So he said, there was a certain pleasant feeling from gaining this knowledge, but it did not invade my mind. It did not take over. It was held in check. And then it went away. Second knowledge, right, which is the knowledge of the passing away and the rebirth of other beings. As in that moment, when he surveyed, you could say that the first one he was surveying vertically, so to say, but backwards or downwards into his own past. The second knowledge was the knowledge, the ability to see outwards to everyone in all places. He says the knowledge, the ability to see the passing away and the rebirth of beings. Both of these knowledges is directly related to seeing how cause and effect works. Seeing the principle of karmic causality. What kinds of causes led to what kinds of results? That's what I think we can kind of take note of, right? Again, you might say, I don't know, all this past life business, right? Born, death, Okay, fine. Lay that aside. I just need you to know that the sources do say this. I'm not expecting you to accept this. If you want a take-home lesson, the take-home lesson would be, without needing to take home, okay, I should believe in past life, future lives. What you should take home is, insofar as the Buddha's method, the Buddha's explanation of the problem and the solution, it is really important to pay attention to karmic causality. That things don't happen without a reason, and those reasons, those causes, are causes that we create. Other people cannot create suffering for us. You're like, you have not met some of those people I have been meeting these days, right? No. We say those are not causes. Those are conditions of your suffering. They are not the causes. The causes of your happiness and your suffering is your own doing. When those causes meet the right conditions, a certain supervisor, got appointed to that position. A certain neighbor moved into the neighborhood, right? Those are conditions of suffering. Without causes, you will not meet with that particular happiness or that particular suffering. Now, the third knowledge gain was the destruction of all defilements. And in terms of that, I won't read the second knowledge, because the second knowledge is basically, actually, hold on. Maybe I'll say a little bit. These beings who were endowed with bad conduct of body, speech, and mind, who reviled the noble ones, who held wrong views and undertook actions under the influence of wrong views, with the breaking up of the body after death, have reappeared in the plane of deprivation, bad destination, lower realms. But these beings who were endowed with good conduct of body, speech, and mind, who did not revile the noble ones, who held right views and undertook actions under the influence of right views, with the breakup of the body after death, have reappeared in a good destinations in the divine realms. So that's the second knowledge. The third knowledge, I directed it, so again the mind was concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished. I directed it to the knowledge of the ending of mental defilements. This is the third watch. I discerned as it had come to be that this is suffering or stress, and this is the origination of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering, and this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Basically, in summary, what's known as the Four Noble Truths, which is also going to be the first formal teaching that he gives when he goes seeking. Remember Deer Park? When he goes seeking the 5 ascetics, the first thing he taught them was in detail this third knowledge, the 4 noble truths. So these are the 3 awakenings. So we know something about, so a Buddha, if someone is a Buddha, then according to this account, they became Buddha, they became awake when they gained these 3 knowledges. Okay? That's not how necessarily how later Buddhists would think about what Buddhas are, and that's definitely not what all those countless memes on social media say or imagine what a Buddha is. Yeah. There's a resource called Fake Quotes from the Buddhas, you know.
That's not what your country can do for you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's not what samsara can do for you. But now, let's think about implications, of these 3 awakenings. I'm just offering you some of these implications, not like some brilliant thing that I thought up, based on reading and different people. And I drew a few, and I think that might be interesting for us. Is one implication is that there is something, right? There is something that is not fleeting. There is a kind of happiness. There is a state of being called Buddha, right? That is different from the existential situation that we find ourselves in. So there is such a thing. There's this undying happiness. So, in terms of that, elsewhere, the Buddha talks about this state of being, this place where, place, right? Metaphorically, place. Right? He says, where water, earth, fire, and wind. These are the 4 great elements that constitute our physical world, our physical universe. He says, where water, earth, fire, and wind have no footing. They can't land in this state of being. There the stars do not shine, the sun is not visible, the moon does not appear. Why? Because darkness is not found. And when a sage, a worthy one, through wisdom has known this, then from form and formless, from pleasure and pain, they are freed. You are freed from form and formless, from pleasure, pain, from body, and even whatever notion of spirit you think it is. You are beyond those categories. Part of what is said here is, of course, a contrast, It's to point to how, light exists because darkness exists. Materiality exists because the non-material is there. At this state of liberation of being a Buddha, you are freed from these dualities. A more poetic and personal expression of what this state of liberation. So there is a collection of songs of liberation. These are supposedly a collection of songs of liberation, recording what a number of monks and nuns uttered when they experienced their own awakening. These are disciples of the Buddha. So there is one woman called Patachara. So this is what she said. Washing my feet, I noticed the water. And in watching it flow from high to low, my heart was composed like a fine thoroughbred steed. Then, taking a lamp, I entered the hut, checked the bedding, sat down on the bed. After taking a pin, I pulled out the wick. Like the flames unbinding was the liberation of awareness. So apparently, this is how it happened for her. What's the washing feet? That's something that apparently the Buddha did too. So it was a custom in India at that time. Before you sleep, you wash your feet. So she was by a river washing her feet, watching water flow from high to low. She said, my heart was composed like that of a thoroughbred steed. Strong, but under control, disciplined. Taking a lamp, I entered entered her hut, checked her bedding, sat down on the bed, then pulled the wick. And when that flame got extinguished, in that moment, she woke up. She became awake. She became freed. Like the flames unbinding was the liberation of awareness. So that's another very interesting one. Nirvana literally means to extinguish, but it also means to unbind. Literal translation is to extinguish, but our notion of what happens when you blow off the flame of a candle is what? Kaput. Dead, gone, finished. In the Buddha's time, when he used this expression, nirvana, it's closer to what we would say unbinding. Because how his audience understood flame is that flame is basically energy trapped. And as long as the fuel and the wick is there, this energy will remain trapped. And so when you go, it's unbound. So here, awareness, freed, liberated. Mind, freed, liberated. Yeah, so this is how there's quite a few of these songs, very evocative. A book just came out by Bhikkhu Analayo called the Early Sisters or something like that. Bhikkhu Analayo. I have not seen it yet. It should be a very good volume. He translates these songs and then he gives us as much as is possible to find about the lives of these early Buddhist women. Bhikkhu Analayo, Analayo, German monk in the very reliable lineage of German scholarship. Very accurate. No fooling around, right? Now, so this liberation, yes, this state, it is possible. There is this undying happiness. And furthermore, it's available to us. That's the thing. We don't only have one Buddha. We have many Buddhas. In fact, in early Buddhism, there's the emphasis of you could be someone who heard the Buddha and became a disciple of a Buddha, which is also a kind of Buddha. So like Sister Patachara, She was a type of Buddha, a disciple of the Buddha who also similarly was freed, was liberated by her own efforts. So this state of being is available to us. So that's, I think, one important implication. That's on, you could say, the transcendent side of things, although that word is somewhat problematic, but we'll live with that for now. The transcendent side of things, right? The ultimate side of things is that this kind of being, this kind of state of existence is possible, is available. Then the other side of this coin is, to me, point 2 and point 3. 1.2 is that what we do matters. And sometimes it's so easy to forget that. When we feel like everything is just spinning out of control, right? The world is controlled by all these forces, and if the visible forces are not enough, then you have the what? The Illuminati and whatever else, right? They are controlling the world, and you feel like, nothing you do matters anymore unless you do something really big. Here is saying no. In fact, what you do right here, right now, it does matter. It can make a difference. Of course, footnote, don't obsess. That's the other thing, right? You see these bumper stickers that says, if you are not outraged by things, you're probably asleep. And then we all go driving around feeling really guilty, Why am I not outraged? Why am I not yelling and screaming that the world has, gone so wrong? That would be fixating. Here Buddha says, insofar as your own happiness and suffering, you can do something about it. What you do matters. And remember the reference to right and wrong views? Yeah, so before you kind of, somehow think or file away and say, oh, yeah, it's religion. They're always talking about right and wrong, right? Orthodox and not orthodox. You should understand that in the Buddhist context, almost always whenever they talk about right or wrong view, what makes right or wrong view is it a view that leads you to take action and make a difference? Or is it a view that renders action impossible and paralyzes you? Yeah, if you have a view of the world, if you have a view of things that is, say, based on like, oh, it's fated, wrong view. Oh, it's already been decided, wrong view. There's nothing I can do, it won't make any difference, wrong view. That leads to more suffering. If we have a view that says, no, actually, I can make a difference. Now, of course, in the Buddha's teachings, in more details, there are limitations too. It's not just this pop psychology, feel good, like just visualize what you want and you will get it. It doesn't work like that. That's also a fake quote from the Buddha. I don't know if anyone said the Buddha said that, No, it's also not like that. There are certain givens that are kind of hard to change. But within the givens, and a lot of the givens are actually not given, but there are some givens, but within those givens, there's a lot of things that we can do. Just like he was also subjected to the givens, but he was able to break beyond those givens. Right? So what we do matters. And finally, also I think an important point, it is not all relative. Good and bad good and bad is something that is, you could say, part and parcel of how things are. That which cause harm to yourself and to others, that is bad. Doesn't matter what culture. That doesn't matter where you are. Happiness and suffering. As long as you have sentience, right, there are certain types of things. So karma, karmic causality, is the way things are. And if we fail to see that, if you somehow think, oh, I can ignore that. If I ignore that, it won't harm me. Well, some things may be at work like that. But there are a number of things that don't work like that. So that it is not all relative. Yes, of course, later you say, well, what about this point? What about that point? Yes, there are certain points that say, when you understand, when you have the wisdom, right, your relationship with certain things change, right? But that's not saying that the nature of fire is no longer hot. Fire, by definition, burning is its nature. So there are things like this. And that, how do we get that implication? Him seeing, right? His own past lifetimes, what kinds of actions led to what kind of results. Him being able to see right now who has passed on from this life and move on to another existence, and what kind of existence have they been reconstituted in. That's all based on a set of abiding principles. It's not without rhyme or reason. Yeah, so these are some implications that I think we can take from this. Now, let's move on to the second profile of a Buddha. So what can we see in these early sources? In the earlier sources, so we'll start with, what was Siddhartha Gautama like? Which is like post-awakening. So let's say Gautama Buddha. Because from the point that he became awake, then his disciples, of course, would call him Lord, Bhagavan, or Buddha, awakened one. People who were not part of that family would refer to him as Gautama, his family name. Yeah. So what kind of a person was he? What kind of a profile that can we get when we look at the early sources? So for one thing, what we can know, what we can see is he definitely experienced things such as fatigue, illness, aging, decay, and finally death. Yeah, so to say that he wasn't human is not to say that he did not experience these things. Yeah, these characteristics that we share, he had that too. Especially like in the accounts of like in his 80th year. So there's a few accounts in the teachings, like the last teaching that he gave is an extended long teaching from the point where he accepted an offering of lunch from a silversmith to the onset of dysentery, and within a day he passed away. Where he had lunch to where he passed away was about 12 miles, I think. 8 miles, 12 miles, that was the distance that he traveled. And especially in that text, you see, definitely, he was depicted as fatigued, and dysentery has set in. But it turns out that in various other places, you get hints that indigestion was one of the issues that he always had. That he had a hard time digesting food. And then the other thing too, that seemed to have been part of the human side of this person, lower back pain, that he experienced that as an ongoing issue. But despite this, and here I think is the beauty, these conditions did not control him the way they would control us. Yeah, he was continued to be very patient, very kind, very available to anyone who wants guidance. But definitely, so towards the end, so this is one of the quotes you can get from that particular discourse. I too, Ananda, his cousin and attendant, am now old and full of years. My journey is drawing to its close. I have reached my sum of days. I'm turning 80 years of age, and just as a worn-out cart, Ananda can be kept going only with the help of thongs. So this body can only be kept going by repairs. And then he said, Ananda, I need your help. In that discourse, it said that traveling that 8 to 10 miles distance, he stopped like over 25 times because it was getting harder and harder for him. So physically, we know something, about kind of like his chronic physical problems. Then eventually he died of dysentery. In that meal that he was served, the silversmith, apparently the silversmith provided a meal, I think I mentioned this, it's called Pig's Delight. So it's kind of like, what is it, Pig's Delight? Some people think it's pork that is soft. But others think that it's a mushroom, like porcini, which is related to pigs. So pigs like to eat those types of mushrooms. So anyway, he told Chunda, his host, Chunda prepared many different types of food for him and his disciples. Then he told Chunda, because then the most like special dish was this Sukaramadava, this Pig's Delight. And he said to Chunda, Chunda, nobody else eats this. And in fact, I'm going to eat a bit of it. Then when I'm done eating, make sure you bury this in the ground. Yeah. Just make sure you bury this in the ground. Nobody else should eat it afterwards. And then his dysentery started. And as he was traveling to his final place, he knew where he wanted to die, in the forest. At one point he stopped and he said, he gave a number of advice, and then at one point he stopped and he said, oh, by the way, he said, let no one blame Chunda and say that, the Buddha ate his lunch and then died. And then the Buddha says, in fact, let everybody know that I am now saying, in my life, of all the meals that have been offered to me, two have the greatest merit. The meal that was given to me right before I became Buddha, the meal that revived him, because he was almost on the verge of death because of the extreme asceticism that he was practicing. It's saying that he was even only eating 1 grain of rice per day, that he was starving himself. But finally he got this basically milk pudding, sugar, milk, and rice. That meal, he said, and this last meal, they have the greatest merit. Yes? And he said, please go tell Chunda not to think that, he killed me. It has nothing to do with him. And we are told, the Buddha says, this is because in one past lifetime, so again, karma, he said in one past lifetime when he was a doctor and he was asked to go treat a village that had some kind of illness, out of negligence, he gave the wrong prescription. It wasn't even intentional. He was trying to help, but out of negligence, he killed I don't know how many people in the village because of his wrong prescription. And so it said that from that karma, lifetime to lifetime, he experienced the effect of that negative karma, so that even now, in this lifetime where he's already Buddha, awake, there is this residual effect that has to wear itself out. And so he knew when he ate that Sukaramadava that, it's probably poisonous, not intended. Yeah. So again, you see a very kind and patient person. Yeah. We can also see, like, yeah. And lots of stories of troubles within and without. As Buddha, as head of his community, the early community, his monks and nuns, they are far from, all like saintly figures. In fact, there was an infamous group that is constantly causing trouble. We have names of these guys. The names are given. They were constantly giving trouble. A whole number of monks and a couple of nuns are often mentioned. Then one time, even two groups of fielding monks in this city, Kosambi. And the Buddha went to try to intervene. His own monks, they were fielding and fighting. And he went to try to stop. Basically, these monks said to him, "Oh Lord, you're old now, so just stay out." And Buddha walked away, and Buddha was really, by our terms, disappointed. He said, "Okay, I tried." And then it said that he left. Even those faithful disciples around him, he said, don't come with me. I want to be alone. And that also then ended with him going to the forest, and then a monkey came and attended to him. So that theme is painted on monastery walls, a monkey offering honey. For a couple of days, the Buddha said, I don't want to, I don't want to be head of that community and deal with all those unruly monks, So that story is there, They preserve the story. Then they also preserve stories that are not very flattering, actually. In fact, you remember the guy who said, "Are you this? Are you that? Are you this? Are you that?" And then the Buddha, says this to us, like this wow statement, right? "I am Buddha." You know what our sources say? This guy go, "Okay, yeah, whatever." And he walks off. Not very impressive. Did not impress this guy. So modern scholars say, this has to be real. This incident, that they can't take it out. No one would concoct a story like that. There is a second incident. This was actually later in his life. It is said that one of the first people he met when he was awake, before he even saw the 5 monks, was another guy wandering around and running into him and saying, "Hey, what are you?" And again, he was like, "I am Buddha, I am awake." And this guy say, "Oh, if you say so." And then he walks off. Yeah, it's like, well, okay, if you say so. It's sort of like, walking down Haywood and, and somebody claiming to be Jesus, right? You're like, okay. I gotta go now. This happened to the Buddha, right? Then troubles outside, other people giving trouble. It said that there was a situation where jealousy from other groups, apparently so much patronage went to the Buddha and his community. So then they concocted a scandal. They got a woman to accuse the Buddha as being the father of her pregnancy, of her child, like faked it apparently with a wooden tub, according to this story. And not only that, this is kind of a dark conspiracy. Then after she hurled her accusations and she left, they murdered her, got rid of her body. So the rumor continued that Gautama has, impregnated a woman. Stories like that. Then, closer to home, his jealous cousin was constantly trying to take over the community. And when he failed to take over the community, in fact, one way he tried to take over the community was he wanted higher standards for the community, stricter rules. Buddha said no. And he was not successful. Then he went in cahoots to a new king who had become king by murdering his father. And his father was a patron of the Buddha. So now Devadatta and Ajatasattu ganged up together to try to destroy the Buddha's community. One time feeding fermented coconut water, which means it's alcohol. I think it was coconut. Fermented to a pack of wild elephants. And so basically you have a pack of drunken wild elephants charging at the Buddha. And then miraculously the Buddha escaped. Another time the Buddha was walking through a valley and Devadatta pushed down a big boulder to crush the Buddha. Again, the Buddha escaped. So there are these problems from inside and outside. So again, the Buddha handled all of it in a way that when we read these stories, like, yeah, this is really impressive, Did the Buddha get angry? Well, on the one hand, we said no, because he's free of defilements, right? Mental defilements. But that doesn't mean, the sources don't say that he has used, that he did use strong words. Actually, regarding Devadatta, so let me see. Yeah. So about Devadatta, this is what he said. Ananda one time asked the Buddha about Devadatta and said, because Devadatta was family, a cousin, and Ananda is nephew of the Buddha. So Ananda asked the Buddha about Devadatta, and this is apparently what the Buddha said. As long as Ananda, I saw a bright spot in Devadatta, even the prick end of a horsehair in size, I declared not, quote, Devadatta is wayward gone, hellbound for an eon, unpardonable. But it was when I saw none that I declared that. He said he could not even see a speck of dust of goodness in Devadatta, that therefore he has to say that Devadatta is wayward gone, hellbound for a kalpa, unpardonable. So various places the Buddha did use very strong language. At the same time, also, this other one, the other opposite, he said, one time, the Buddha and his disciples, they entered this city, Vaishali, and saw these people in Vaishali dressed in different colors of clothing and ornaments and looking really beautiful on some festival day. Then the Buddha says, "Oh brothers, let those brothers who have never seen the gods in their godly ground gaze upon this company. Behold these company of citizens of Vaishali. Compared to the gods, they are even more beautiful." So he could enjoy beauty. Because if you look at some of the other sources, it seems like he was kind of a bore. Or you might get that impression. But that's probably a problem in when we translate, the particular expressions don't come across so clearly. And then also, did the Buddha have a sense of humor? Well, let me read you. Monks, these 5 ancient Brahmanical traditions are now, so Brahmins, right? I said, it wasn't so strong a Brahmin culture, but strong enough for the Buddha to address, to compare. And so he says, monks, these 5 ancient Brahmanical traditions are now observed among dogs, but not among Brahmins. What 5? In the past, Brahmin males mated only with Brahmin females and not with non-Brahmin females. At present, Brahmin males mate with Brahmin females and with non-Brahmin females. At present, male dogs only mate with female dogs, not with female non-dogs. This is the first ancient Brahmanical tradition that is now observed among dogs, but not among Brahmins. Now you have to understand, right? It's not saying that non-Brahmin women are not good enough, but it's talking about power differential. So then a Brahmin male could, force, basically. So that's implied here. Next, in the past, Brahmin males mated with Brahmin females only in season and not out of season. At present, Brahmin males mate with Brahmin females in season and out of season. At present, male dogs mate with female dogs only in season and not out of season. This is the second ancient Brahmanical tradition that is now observed among dogs, but not among Brahmins. In the past, Brahmin males did not buy or sell Brahmin females, but took up cohabitation for the sake of reproduction simply through mutual attraction. At present, Brahmin males buy and sell Brahmin females and take up cohabitation for the sake of reproduction simply through mutual attraction. At present, male dogs do not buy or sell female dogs, but take up cohabitation for the sake of reproduction simply through mutual attraction. This is the third Brahmanical tradition, ancient Brahmanical tradition that is not observed among dogs. The next one is Brahmins did not use to stash wealth, grain, silver, or gold. Now they stash wealth, grain, silver, and gold. Likewise, dogs still do not stash grain, silver, and gold. This ancient Brahmin tradition only exists among dogs these days. Then the final one, Brahmins search for alms for their morning meal in the morning and for their evening meal in the evening in ancient times. But now, having eaten as much as they like, swelling their bellies, leave taking the leftovers. Even the leftovers they take with them, you know. At present, dogs search for alms for their morning meal in the morning and for their evening meal in the evening, and do not hoard their food. You know, this is the fifth ancient Brahmanical tradition, no longer observed by Brahmins, only continued by dogs. So these are, you know, Brahmins are very proud of their ancient tradition, you know. Everything is, well, our ancestors did this. So the Buddha had a sense of humor. Yeah. Many other, if you want more of these stories, there is a collection called The Buddha Smiles. And it's compiled by one of my favorite contemporary monks, scholar monks, Thanissaro Bhikkhu. So he published this book, The Buddha Smiles, and he gives 9 categories of the Buddha's humor. Yeah, lots of great stories like this, yeah? So look that up, The Buddha Smiles. You can download it for free. He never sells any of his books. Yeah. Now, at the same time, we have talked so much about the seemingly what we can so easily relate to. But at the same time, even in these early sources, there's emphasis on, for example, marks of a great person. Said there are 32 physical features about the Buddha that set him aside from others. And then later traditions will develop those expand on that and said, for example, one of the features, my favorite one, is that the Buddha has a tongue that is so long and broad that the tip of the tongue can touch his forehead. Yeah, and flexible, right? And they say, where does that quality come from? The quality came from many, many, many lifetimes of not telling lies. And therefore, his tongue is long and flexible. That his feet he was flat-footed. But maybe that was the cause of his back. I don't know, but this is given as a sign, as a good thing, that he was flat-footed, and the notion that flat-footed is like he could stand very firm. So that is said to do with his firmness in resolve that he cultivated, and that gave rise to this particular characteristic, physical characteristic. It said that his chest was that of a lion, like that of a lion. Then also supernormal feats, what we might call miracles. Now, those miracles are related to the notion that these are things that you can do when your mind is very well trained. Very well trained. And so since the Buddha's mind, of all his disciples, of the whole community, his is, of course, the most well trained. And so he was able to do things that would be miraculous from our point of view. In fact, there are monastic rules that came about because of various monks using different miraculous feats. In one case, it led to the Buddha's making a rule. Right? You're not allowed to show your miraculous powers. So this story has something to do with some king got a big chunk of sandalwood, and he decided to carve it into a bowl, a begging bowl. And he said, the bits I'm going to use, then the bowl I'm going to offer. And he put it high up a pole, and he announced to the country, whoever can take that bowl down, I'll give it to him. And so all the different ascetics came and tried to fly up there to take the bowl. Then one morning, 2 of the Buddha's disciples went into the city and saw the commotion and said, what's going on? And then people told them what was going on. And so one of the disciples said, hey, why don't you go take it? And apparently he went there, and then he just levitated all the way up to the pole, took the pole down, and came down. And the king was so impressed, and lavished him with all kinds of offerings. So then he went home. He went back. And the whole city was buzzing with, how Gautama's disciple won the competition. There's a lot of commotion. And the Buddha could hear that there are lots of people coming. And he's like, what's going on? Then somebody said, oh, Pindala just did that. And he said, go call him. Pindala comes. He goes, did you just do what they said you did? Pindala said, yeah, I was walking out with Mongalana. Actually, Mongalana is famous for the one with a lot of these magic powers. But Mongalana, somehow, he didn't do it. He told Pindala, hey, why don't you do it? And Buddha says, you did that? He said, yeah. Buddha says, this is lowly. He says, this is unbecoming. Your little tricks. Now you have a whole bunch of people thinking that you're so great for the wrong reasons. That we are so great for the wrong reasons. And he says, from now on, none of you, even if you have these powers, are allowed to show them in public. It's very interesting, his attitude. He said, now they are going to come to us for the wrong reasons. Now, in other cases, he himself did use. This story had to do with, he understood that 3 brothers who were fire worshippers, right, and they're heads of 3 communities of fire worshippers, that they were ripe, right, to receive the Dharma. So he told his disciples, he said, I'm going to go off to do some stuff. You guys don't come with me. I'll be gone for a while. So he wandered to the first group. And he asked the leader, he said, I'm a wandering ascetic passing through. Can I spend a night in your fire temple? And then the leader said, yeah, but I don't think the snake in there would like it. And the Buddha said, no, it's okay. I'll be fine. He said, well, I've warned you. So he went in and basically he overcame this noxious snake that was guarding the sacred fire. And it said in the sources, he could have burned the snake, but he decided not to do that. Instead, he tamed the snake so that the next day they were all surprised, that he didn't die and the snake has become a friend. Then he continued to stay with them. And then later it said that he noticed that they need a lot of wood to feed the sacred fire. And then so he said, you need help? I can chop the wood for you. He did some magic trick. He caused the wood to not split. Some Jedi mind tricks. So they could not split and they were getting desperate. Then he came to offer a solution. He's like, I can split it for you. So then he split the wood and then they were very happy with him. So it said that through that, slowly, he changed them. Then they became receptive to what he had to teach. And eventually they all became his disciples. So he did that. Yeah. Now, clicking on the wrong side. So this, what we just heard, this is the early profile, or the profile of a Buddha that we can get from the early sources. Now, from there, already from these sources, eventually, the question of bodies of Buddha came to the fore. And what's this business about body? Basically, it's a question of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. The Buddha himself said, when you see my teachings, when you understand my teachings, then you have seen my Dharma body, my Dharma kaya, my collection of Dharma. And he who sees the Dharma has seen the true Buddha. But that did not stop others from also thinking about what about the other body, which eventually became known as Rupakaya, the physical body. The physical body also became something important because clearly there were many accounts where people saw the Buddha, didn't even hear him teach. Of course, there were also those who saw and heard him and said, okay, they go away. But more cases of, in the early sources, of people simply seeing him physically and understood that there was something different about this person. With regards to those special signs, it's unclear if everybody saw those signs or only certain people or some people saw some of it and some did not see the other signs. So from this early point, the focus went more and more in the direction of the real Buddha, the true Buddha, are those mental qualities, those inner qualities, right? So much so that the tradition that talked about, his physical signs, it didn't take long before Buddhists felt a need to offer an explanation for why, right, his tongue was the way it was. Oh, another thing, he had 40 teeth. Yeah, 40. Like Buddhists started to you see this kind of this desire or this need to explain even his physical body in terms of his Dharma body, his qualities. So the qualities of the Buddha eventually, you could say, became the definition of what a Buddha is. Then in later traditions, right, Buddha is no longer just this person, Siddhartha, but Siddhartha is an example, a case of a Buddha known to us, so to say. And that anyone and everyone who begin to develop and embody these inner qualities, and when this embodiment of these inner qualities became complete and full, that is what a Buddha is. Of course, there's a long history. So from the two bodies, later sources talk about three bodies. The Rupakaya turns into further subdivides, kind of a bridge between the Dharmakaya and the physical body is this body called the enjoyment body. This is the notion of like Buddhas naturally enjoy teaching the Dharma. So finally, one of the main, I would say, characteristic of a Buddha is the word that to us seems kind of, oh, really? Okay. That just tells us how much we value this word, which is often he's simply called the teacher. But the teacher in the Indian context bears, I would say, the same weight as what in the Western Christian tradition would call the Savior. Because within the Buddhist system, there is no possibility of a Savior the way Christians think about a Savior. Then the closest to that greatness within the Buddhist context is to call him the teacher. Because Buddhas can guide without error. And their ability to guide comes from their wisdom, having seen clearly, and also their compassion. So these days when we say Buddha, we say the Buddha is the full development of these two wings of awakening, wisdom and compassion. Now, no, undoubtedly, I think over time, right? I think as human society becomes more complex, more sophisticated, we know more and more things. Then to express the idea of how wise and how compassionate Buddhas are, then their ability to be wise and the degree of what they know, their ability to be compassionate, meaning the ability to do all kinds of incredible things that you and I can't do, got added on and added on and added on and added on until perhaps now, if we read some of those accounts, ironically, maybe it feels a little distant and impossible. But that certainly wasn't the intention. Yeah? It's really, I would say, the intention is to emphasize. Like whatever degree of wise that you can think of, a Buddha is wise in that way. Whatever degree of like compassion, meaning a way to actually help you, is possible, to that degree a Buddha is. Yeah? And so then throughout culture and human society and civilization becoming more and more incredible, then the powers of the Buddha also became more and more and more incredible, as in the literal meaning of the word, incredible. Incredible. Yes. Often it's a mix of both. Unbelievable, like unbelievable. Also, throughout Buddhist history, there's always also, as Buddha, the notion of Buddha grows and grows and grows, right, to fill that need, I would argue throughout Buddhist history, throughout Buddhist traditions across, that has gone in different parts of Asia, the other direction is always also there, which is, this is something that you can become, no matter how incredible, in both senses of the word, you can become that. That was never lost. Yes?
I'm trying to understand when you say Buddhas and when you say the Buddha.
When I say the Buddha, yeah, so you're trying to understand the difference between Buddhas in the plural and the Buddha. So the Buddha, I would say, as I started off, we'll use Siddhartha as the reference point. So the Buddha.
So there's not
Oh, no.
like, there's like, I understand there's one Jesus.
Yes.
So there's not just
No. That's why I said, right?
one Buddha we use is the first.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's why I said, Buddhas are unique, but not in the way that Jesus is unique. Jesus, there never was, there never will be. Only one. As rare as Buddhas are, we all can become Buddhas. And in fact, that's the point of the Buddha teaching. It's because you can become Buddha, you can become Buddha, you can become Buddha, that the Buddha taught. Otherwise, why? That's why the teacher, that simple word, calling him the teacher, it's like the greatest thing that you can say about someone. The teacher. The teacher, not just a teacher. Now, switching again now, the practicum. This is more like just, take-home lesson, homework, to whatever degree. So last week we talked about the notion of refuge. So if you have registered, you should have gotten a link an email link of last week's class. So in the practicum, I talked about refuge, taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So continuing from the Milarepa encounter with the boy, so Milarepa teaches the boy, first, what is mind? Go explore that, he told the boy. The boy came back. Now the boy says, I want to know more. I want to know more. Now I'm really curious. And I want to figure out this mind. And the Buddha says, in that case, do you have refuge? And so last week I talked about the role of refuge in providing, right, the support, the context, the safety, refuge in that sense, right? So if you go back and listen to that, now with refuge like this, as we talked about last week, now Milarepa continues with the boy and said, now settle your mind. The boy said, how? He said, go try it, and then come back. After a few days, the boy comes back. It's like, oh, I have been working on settling this mind, stilling the mind. And he said, impossible. Impossible. Every time I tell it to quiet, like shut up, right? Serenity now. It just gets more. Milarepa said, yeah. Now, how about don't tell it to quiet down, but just watch it. Boy said, really? I said, yeah, just watch it. Don't tell it to do anything. So the boy goes, and the boy comes back. The boy said, oh, actually this time, I did what you say, I sat there and just try looking for it. I mean, he didn't use this expression, but it's almost like Tom and Jerry, just watching that mouse hole. Is he coming out? Is he coming out? Is he coming out? And the thing about watching this mind and see, is it coming out? Is it coming out? Yeah. You can't, Jerry is not going to come out. Tom just needs to watch. It's when Tom is not watching, then Jerry is all over the place. But if the cat is watching right outside of the mouse hole, the cat settles and no mouse in sight. So how do we settle the mind? How do we still the mind? Sometimes it's to do the counterintuitive. It's not to be absent-minded, because every time we're absent-minded, it seems like our house is infested. How is Jerry simultaneously present in every single room, causing havoc? That is when we're not watching. When we watch. In other words, when we are present. Now, how do we remain present? How do we remain present, right? Actually, there is a hint. I planted this. No, actually, there is a hint here. See what it says, The third knowledge. Hmm. When one is heedful, ardent, and resolute. Heedful, mindful, present. But this presence, right, need to be ardent. There's some ardency, there's some vigor. In the same way that Tom is really interested in Jerry. It needs to have that. Otherwise, it's hard, to be present. Tom would just fall asleep. And that's too relaxed. Once you fall asleep, again, Jerry and his, emanations running all over the place. Right? So ardency. And resolute here is staying the course. Staying the course. So this kind of stilling the mind is an interesting balance between relaxing because the boy tried stopping, which is like yelling at the mouse. Stop, stop, stop. The more you yell, the more noisy it gets. So you have to stop that. But presence. This presence of mind, this resolute mind, this ardent mind, this heedful mind, these are the very qualities of awakened mind. This is Buddha. This is present. This Buddha is the refuge that we're talking about. When we take refuge in the Buddha, we are developing, calling forth, if you want to express it that way, these very qualities that we can develop. Back to what are some of the implications of saying that the Buddha's awakening consists of these three knowledges, which is, this is something that you and I have access to. That what we cultivate matters. In fact, the word for meditation, bhavana, in Sanskrit, has etymologies that can also be translated, often translated as practice, but better translation is to cultivate. In fact, the word bhavana in the Buddha's time, apparently it was used by farmers to talk about what they do. And so then the Buddha borrowed that as a metaphor for the spiritual work that he was teaching. So he did not use the word like austerity, tapas. There's a word. So there were definitely a lot of ascetics during the Buddha's time that felt that the way to arrive, right, to reach their goal of whatever spiritual liberation they were imagining is through austerity, through denying the body. In fact, even torturing the body, to free, right, the divine self from the trap that this physical body is. The Buddha rejected all those methods. The Buddha says, it's a matter of the mind, it's the matter of the heart. And don't beat your body. Yeah, and found that they did not bring the answers. Yeah, exactly. And he also went through a long period of indulgence as a prince. Neither of those. He says, if you go about pleasing this body, you will not find that undying happiness that you want. If you go about torturing this body, you are not going to find the solution that you want. Because it's not about the body. It's about the mind. And so when it comes to the mind, it's something that we can develop. What we cultivate makes a difference. Right now, we are cultivating confusion. Right now, our circuits are wired for suffering. That they become so automatic. It's like flipping a switch on, because your switchboard is all wired to go in the direction of suffering. So what Dharma practice is to rewire this circuit. To rewire this circuit so that it becomes, if we successfully rewire this, then it's instantaneous. Flip the switch. Clarity instead of confusion is what we will have. Confusion is by definition very fragile, actually, very fragile. So the confusion itself is actually very fragile. But you know what is tenacious? Habits. How often, right? We all like, well, I knew I shouldn't have. So habits. Then when it comes to habits, what are we habituating? Are we habituating confusion or are we habituating clarity? Are we habituating cruelty or are we habituating compassion? There is no third alternative. So what we choose matters and can make a difference quite immediately. It doesn't have to wait until, lights are coming out of your head. The effects can come if you put effort and you pay attention to how it's changing. See, a lot of times we also don't pay attention to how it is changing. Then we get distracted again by habits of confusion and habits of cruelty. Cruelty to ourselves and cruelty to others, So we have a choice. We need to see what choice are we making. So I think we have reached the end of tonight's. Next week we are not meeting, a change of schedule, but the following week, that Thursday before New Year's, we will continue with this class. Then looking forward, some announcements this weekend. There is this weekend. There is on Saturday, right? Is this right? Yeah, on Saturday there is the movie night. So come if you want to watch. And usually in these movie nights, I give a commentary and explain what we're seeing. This movie is not long, just an hour, a little bit less even, but pretty interesting, amazing. It's contemporary times. I talked about this. Yeah, a nun traveling through Tibet. So then New Year's Eve, we have a program here. And then to call your attention to, there is going to be 2 Saturdays towards the end of January, the last 2 Saturdays of January. We're going to have a series on death and dying, preparing for that. This is not going to be, for those of you who are familiar with the more esoteric, like Tibetan Buddhist, all the details of the dissolution and all of that, that will require a whole course of itself over several, more than 2 weekends. These 2 weekends are sort of like the bare basics. And also I hope to share with you actually a very helpful document that another Buddhist center came up with. It covers a lot of ground, all the practical things. I mean, if you want to kind of, do what we think, is the best way to move forward, so to say, right? We're not able to choose how to come, but we can do something about how to go when the time comes. Now is the time to prepare. It's actually on the eve of Chinese New Year. So my friends in Malaysia is like, oh, do you really want us to think about this? I was like, yeah, perfect time. Chinese New Year is like Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, all rolled into one. Yeah, it's a big deal. It goes on like 2 weeks before New Year and 2 weeks after New Year. No work gets done. Well, 2 weeks before New Year is all the work preparing for it. But other kinds of work don't get done. Then the first 2 weeks of New Year, no work gets done. People go to work, but nobody is working at work. People go to work, but nobody's working at work. Nobody expects any work done either, so it's a big deal, you know. And then they say, what? And you are going to talk about death and dying? Yes, correct. Happy New Year. So anyway, thank you, all of you on Zoom, for your participation on Zoom. And yeah, we will see everyone. And if you all wave over there, and I'll wave over here. And then we're all waving at each other. And okay, bye-bye, good night. And ta-ta.